The aroma of roasted rosemary and garlic hung heavy in the air, a cruel reminder of my empty stomach and even emptier existence. Across the table, my wife, Clara, sat bathed in the warm glow of her phone, her perfectly manicured fingers scrolling through an endless feed of curated lives and manufactured happiness. Dinner, meticulously prepared and artfully arranged on the table, lay untouched. Another silent testament to the growing chasm that had become impossible to ignore. "Everything all right, honey?" My voice, a pathetic attempt at casual conversation, shattered the silence, startling Clara from her digital reverie.
Oh, yes, darling. Just catching up with some friends."
She flashed me a perfunctory smile, her eyes already retreating back to the safety of her phone screen. Friends who, I suspected, existed solely within the confines of her carefully curated online persona, a stark contrast to the deafening silence that had become the soundtrack to our marriage. This wasn't the life I had envisioned. 5 years ago, when I slipped that platinum band on her finger, my heart overflowing with a love that felt as solid and unshakable as the vows we whispered, our future had seemed limitless. We were young, ambitious, our love a beacon of hope in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. But somewhere along the way, the spark had dimmed, replaced by a dull ache of disappointment, a slow, agonizing realization that the woman I loved was disappearing, replaced by a carefully crafted facade of perfection, more concerned with the perception of happiness than the real thing. And the worst part, everyone around us seemed to think it was perfectly normal, even admirable.
"You're so lucky,"
They'd coo, their voices dripping with envy, as Clara effortlessly rattled off her latest charity gala attendance or exotic vacation plans.
"She's an absolute catch, Mark. Don't ever let her go."
And I wouldn't, not because I was afraid of losing her, but because I was terrified of admitting that the catch they all envied was nothing more than a beautifully crafted illusion, a gilded cage of her own making. This charade, this carefully orchestrated performance of marital bliss, had become the norm, a societal expectation more suffocating than any prison cell. And the most infuriating aspect of it all, the empty plates.
"Leave something for me, honey."
Clara would say, her voice laced with faux concern, as I cleared the table after yet another solitary dinner, her own plate, a pristine testament to her non-existent appetite, staring back at me with silent accusation. "Leave something for me." A seemingly innocuous phrase, imbued with a polite concern that fooled everyone but me. It was a performance, a charade designed to maintain the illusion of normalcy, to convince the world, and perhaps herself, that everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. The untouched meals, the empty gestures, they were symptomatic of a deeper malaise, a disconnect that no amount of carefully curated social media posts or politely phrased platitudes could disguise. The breaking point came, as it often does, unexpectedly, a phone call, a hospital. My father, a man who'd always seemed invincible, fell by a heart attack. As I raced through the sterile hallways, my mind a chaotic mix of fear and denial, I reached for my phone, my fingers instinctively dialing Clara's number. She answered on the third ring, her voice annoyingly cheerful.
"Hey there, busy bee. What's up?"
The words tumbled out, a jumbled mess of emotion and urgency. "It's my dad. Heart attack, I'm at the hospital." Silence, not the pregnant kind that precedes a revelation, but the hollow, indifferent kind that speaks volumes.
"Oh,
She finally said, her voice devoid of emotion.
well, that's unfortunate. Listen, Mark, I'm actually in the middle of something right now. Can I call you back later?"
Later, I choked out, my voice thick with disbelief. "My father's in the hospital, and you're worried about calling me back later."
"Mark, please.
She sighed, her voice laced with impatience.
Don't make a fuss. You know how important my social media presence is. I have to maintain a certain image."
Image, right, her precious image. In that moment, as the weight of her words slammed into me, I finally saw the truth. She didn't care. Not about my father, not about me, not about anything that didn't fit into her carefully constructed narrative of success and superficial happiness. "Don't bother," I said, my voice cold, devoid of emotion. "And don't bother coming home, your plate will be empty." The silence that followed was deafening, liberating. I hung up the phone, the weight of her absence lighter than the burden I had been carrying for far too long. That night, as I sat by my father's bedside, his hand, frail but reassuringly warm, clasped in mine, I realized the answer to the question that had plagued me for so long. The empty plates, the polite but meaningless gestures, the relentless pursuit of appearances over substance, that's what makes me go from 0 to 100 real quick. The realization that the people you love, the people you've built a life with, are more invested in maintaining a facade than nurturing the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of true connection. And sometimes, the most courageous act, the most liberating decision, is to walk away from the table, to embrace the emptiness, and to finally make space for something real.
Story number 2.
The phone hummed in my hand, a relentless vibration that mirrored the dull ache in my chest. Another call, another voice thick with faux sympathy, another variation of the same empty platitude.
If there's anything I can do.
My wife, Sarah, gone, just like that. A car accident, a cruel twist of fate, and the life we built together, the future we dared to dream about, shattered into a million pieces. Now, I was adrift in a sea of grief, the world a blurry, distorted reflection of the life I once knew. The condolences poured in, a tsunami of empty gestures and well-intentioned but ultimately useless offers of support. Flowers choked every surface of our home, their cloying fragrance a constant reminder of her absence. Food enough to feed a small army piled up in the refrigerator, each casserole dish and Tupperware container a symbol of my inability to eat, to sleep, to function. And then there were the calls, the endless parade of distant relatives, acquaintances, people whose names I barely recognized, their voices thick with feigned concern, their words a pre-recorded script of social obligation.
Anything at all.
They'd intone, their voices heavy with the weight of unspoken expectation.
Don't hesitate to reach out.
But reach out for what? What could they possibly offer that would fill the gaping hole in my life, mend the shattered pieces of my heart? The truth was, their empty gestures, while well-intentioned, were nothing more than a polite fiction, a societal dance designed to maintain the illusion of support without the messy reality of actually providing it. And the worst part, I found myself playing along, offering hollow reassurances, mustering the energy for a weak smile, thanking them for their support. It was exhausting, this charade of normalcy, this unspoken agreement to pretend that their empty gestures held meaning, that their vague promises of assistance provided comfort. One evening, as I sat slumped on the living room floor, surrounded by unopened sympathy cards and half-eaten casseroles, a wave of anger washed over me. Anger at the world for taking Sarah away, at myself for not being able to protect her, and at the suffocating weight of these empty gestures that seemed to mock my grief. My phone buzzed again, the name flashing on the screen, Susan Miller, a colleague of Sarah's, a woman whose ambition I suspected outweighed her actual talent. I'd met her at a few company events, her conversations always a carefully curated blend of work gossip and thinly veiled attempts to climb the corporate ladder. I almost didn't answer. What could she possibly say that I hadn't already heard 1,000 times before? But something, perhaps exhaustion, perhaps a morbid curiosity, compelled me to swipe the green button.
Mark, darling.
Her voice, a symphony of faux sympathy, filled the silence.
I was just devastated to hear about Sarah. She was such a bright light, such a talented artist. Her work at the gallery, simply breathtaking.
I gritted my teeth, bracing myself for the inevitable. If there's anything I can do.
Actually, there is something.
Her voice took on a businesslike tone, a jarring contrast to the feigned grief of moments before.
I've been speaking with the gallery owner, and he's looking to fill Sarah's position quickly. He was very impressed with your eye for detail, your understanding of the art world.
She didn't need to finish this sentence. The truth slammed into me, a cold, hard reality check. She wasn't calling to offer condolences. She was capitalizing on my grief, using my wife's death as a stepping stone in her own ruthless climb to the top. "I'm sorry, Susan." I interrupted, my voice cold, devoid of emotion. "I'm not sure I understand." She backpedaled, her carefully crafted facade cracking.
Oh, Mark, I didn't mean to. It's just that, well, you know how these things are. Life goes on. The gallery needs someone.
"Life goes on," I repeated, my voice rising, the anger I'd been suppressing exploding into the silence. "My wife is gone, and you're worried about the gallery, about your career."
Mark, please.
"Don't Mark, please me." I spat, my voice raw with grief and fury. "And don't you dare pretend to care about Sarah or her work. This isn't about her. It's about you, about your ambition, about your willingness to exploit a tragedy for your own gain." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence that followed was deafening, liberating. It was in that moment, surrounded by the suffocating scent of lilac and the empty gestures of well-wishers, that I finally understood. The polite condolences, the meaningless platitudes, the empty offers of support, that's what makes me go from 0 to 100 real quick. The realization that behind the carefully constructed facade of social etiquette, there's often a chilling indifference, a self-serving agenda that has nothing to do with genuine compassion or support. And sometimes, the most empowering thing you can do is to reject those empty gestures, to embrace the raw, messy truth of your grief, and to find solace not in the hollow words of strangers, but in the quiet resilience of your own broken heart.